It's a sound you never forget. If you've heard it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That sickening, sudden crunch.
Low on metal. Yeah.
Exactly, the sound of glass shattering, maybe that hiss of a radiator steaming.
Yeah.
In just one split second, your boring Tuesday morning commute becomes, I don't know, a scene of absolute chaos.
Mm.
And here's the thing that really gets me. Honestly, it doesn't seem to matter if you've been driving for 2 months or 20 years. When that impact happens, when the adrenaline just dumps into your system,
Your brain just quits.
Uh,
Completely checks out.
it freezes. It's a total system failure. I mean, I consider myself a pretty rational person, but in that moment, I'm useless.
And it's physiological. It's something called the amygdala hijack.
Yeah,
Your brain just reverts to its factory settings.
right,
Fight, flight, or freeze.
right.
The problem is, on a modern highway, relying on those primal instincts is usually the most expensive mistake you can possibly make.
Because your instinct is screaming, jump out and apologize, or just move the car, get out of here. But doing exactly what your gut tells you to do can, well, it can wreck your legal standing.
And cost you thousands.
Yeah.
Or even worse, put you in physical danger.
So today we're doing a deep dive into a source that's basically the manual everyone hopes they'll never ever need. We're breaking down a comprehensive, step-by-step accident procedure guide.
And the mission here is pretty specific. We want to give you a script.
A script.
Yeah, a mental script. The goal of this deep dive isn't just to inform you. It's to preload a procedure into your brain. So if that crunch ever happens, you aren't thinking, you aren't panicking.
You're just executing a plan.
Exactly.
I like that. Turning panic into a checklist.
Mhm.
So let's start at absolute 0 hour. The impact just happened. The airbags might have deployed, which, by the way, smells like burning dust. Nobody tells you that.
No, they don't.
The car has stopped moving. What is the very first thing on that list?
Safety. And I know that sounds really generic, but the source is very specific here. Before you check the bumper, before you yell at the other driver for anything else, you have to secure the scene.
Okay, so what does that mean? Do we stay in the car? Do we get out?
It depends on where you are. If the car is drivable and you're in a dangerous spot like, say, a blind curve or the middle lane of a highway, the guide says your first move is to try to get to a safer place.
Like the shoulder.
The shoulder, an off-ramp, anywhere. You have to minimize the risk of a secondary collision.
Secondary collisions terrify me. Just the idea of getting hit while you're already stopped.
It's a huge risk. People are rubbernecking, they don't see the stopped car, and then bam. So move if you can, and throw in those hazard lights immediately. Make yourself visible.
Okay.
But here's the critical part that people often rush past in the panic. You need to do a rapid body scan. Check yourself and your passengers for any serious injuries.
And this brings us to a really counterintuitive rule in the source material, the one about injuries.
Right, the do not move rule.
See, this is where my instinct completely fails me. If I see someone is hurt, especially a friend or family member, my immediate urge is to help them, get them out of the car.
And that is a dangerous, potentially fatal instinct. The guide states it very clearly. Unless there is a further immediate threat, like the car is literally on fire, you do not move a seriously injured person.
Because of the spine, right.
Exactly. Adrenaline is a powerful painkiller. Someone could have a spinal fracture or a serious neck injury and not feel it yet. If you try to drag them out of the car, you could shift something and turn a recoverable injury into permanent paralysis.
Wow. Okay, so keep them still, keep them calm, call for help.
That's the protocol.
Okay, so let's say we've done the scan, everyone is shaken up, maybe some bruises, but physically okay. Now we look outside, the cars are blocking traffic. I've seen people just leave them there and stand on the shoulder just staring at the damage.
Well, if the vehicles are blocking traffic, the guide says you should place a warning triangle approaching the scene, if you have one. You have to warn other drivers.
That makes sense.
But, and this is a grim but really important detail from the source, in some jurisdictions, if a death has occurred, the protocol changes completely.
How so?
If there's a fatality, the scene stops being a traffic accident and becomes a potential crime scene. You have to stay, and critically, you can't move the vehicles at all until the police arrive.
Even if they're blocking everything.
Even then,
Yeah.
moving them could destroy crucial evidence.
Okay. That really puts it in perspective.
Wow.
So let's assume it's a standard fender bender. No ambulance is needed. You get out of your car, you see the other driver getting out, they look upset. Here is where I think 99% of us fall into what I'd call the politeness trap.
Oh, absolutely. We're social creatures. We want to de-escalate. We hate conflict.
Right? I just want to jump out and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I didn't see you.
Stop. Stop right there. That's the line you can't say.
But it feels so rude not to. I mean, I apologize when someone bumps into me.
I know, but this is what the guide calls the silence strategy. And it is probably the hardest rule to follow. Never admit fault. Do not apologize.
Can we unpack that a bit? Why is "I'm sorry" so dangerous?
Because in the eyes of the law, and especially insurance adjusters, I'm sorry, isn't just being polite. It can be taken as an admission of guilt.
An admission of guilt?
Yes, an admission against interest. If you say, "I'm sorry I hit you," you have just handed the other insurance company a massive weapon to use against you in your claim.
Even if it wasn't my fault. What if I'm just saying sorry that the accident happened at all? Like, sorry we're in this mess.
It doesn't matter. It muddies the waters. You might be 0% at fault, but that apology opens the door for them to argue you accepted some liability. You just don't want to give them that leverage.
So what do? Just stand there and glare at them? That seems like a great way to start a roadside fight.
No, you don't have to be a robot. You just shift from social mode to business mode. Stick to factual descriptions only. The guide suggests being polite and professional, but purely informational.
So here is my license. Here is my insurance. Not, oh man, I was looking at my GPS.
Exactly. Just the facts. Think of it this way. You're not friends. You're two parties in a transaction now. And that transaction is all about data exchange.
Which brings us perfectly to phase 2. The guide calls it documenting, but I like your idea better. Let's call it CSI mode.
Because your memory is garbage. It really is. Stress impacts memory formation. You might think you'll remember exactly where the cars were, but 2 days later, when the adrenaline's gone, you'll second-guess everything.
Wait, was he in the left lane or the middle lane?
Right. So the source says, take immediate, thorough photos.
And it's not just snapping a close-up of the dented fender, is it? I feel like that's what everyone does. They just photograph the damage.
No, and that's a huge mistake. A close-up of a dent tells me nothing about how that dent got there. The guide advises what it calls the four corners approach.
What's that?
You want wide shots that show the entire scene. Capture the layout of the road. Is it an intersection, a merge lane? You want photos showing the position of the vehicles relative to the lane lines. That proves who drifted.
What about the road itself? Any details there?
Crucial. Look for skid marks.
Skid marks, really?
Skid marks are physics. They tell an adjuster or an investigator how fast a car was going and when the driver hit the brakes. If the other guy says he was doing 30, but there are 50 feet of skid marks.
The physics prove he's lying.
Exactly. So photograph the skid marks. Photograph the debris field where all the broken glass and plastic landed. That often shows the exact point of impact.
And license plates, of course.
License plates and, importantly, the little license disc on the windshield if you have those. And here's a tip from the source that I thought was brilliant for when technology fails.
Right, because we all just assume our phone will work.
But what if the battery's dead? Or what if, during the crash, your phone went flying off the mount and smashed against the dashboard?
The analog backup.
The cubbyhole backup.
I love that they call it the cubbyhole. So much cozier than glove compartment.
It's a great reminder, though. The guide says to keep a pen and paper in there. If your phone is dead, you need to be able to make a sketch.
A sketch, like actually draw the road. My stick figures are questionable at best.
It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. It just has to be accurate. Draw the road layout. Draw boxes for the cars. Put an arrow showing the direction of travel. Mark the impact point with a big X. That simple drawing can be more valuable than a blurry photo.
That is such a simple tip, but I bet 90% of the people listening right now do not have a working pen in their car.
It's the cheapest insurance policy you can buy. A 50-cent pen.
Okay, so we're documenting. Now we have to talk to the other driver, the third party. We've agreed not to apologize, but we do need their data.
Yep.
What are we asking for?
It's a whole list, so you have to be methodical. You need their full name, ID number, address, and their insurance details. But specifically, you need their contact numbers, home and cell. And here is a pro tip from the guide. Call their cell number right away while you're standing right there with them.
To make sure they didn't just give you a fake number.
Exactly. People lie, especially if they know they're at fault or if they don't have insurance. They'll rattle off a fake number and be gone. You need to see their phone buzz in their pocket. Verify it works before they leave.
That is sneaky, but so smart. What about witnesses?
If anyone stops, or if there were pedestrians nearby, get their contact info immediately. Independent witnesses are gold. In a he said, she said situation, a neutral witness breaks the tie.
Okay, we've secured the scene, documented everything, swapped info. Now, the big question, do we call the police? I feel like for a minor fender bender, people hesitate. They think, oh, the police have better things to do.
And the source clarifies this. You absolutely contact law enforcement if there are injuries, significant damage, or if local laws require it. But even for medium accidents, getting a police report is still vital.
Why is that piece of paper so important?
Because it's an official, neutral record of the event. You need the officer's name, their badge number, and the police report number. That report number is the golden key for your insurance claim later.
So, get the badge number. Don't be shy about asking the officer for their details.
Never. It's public information. They expect it.
Now, here's a scenario that really scares me. The car is wrecked, it can't be driven, and suddenly a tow truck just appears. You didn't call him, he just shows up.
The towing trap.
Yeah.
It is very real, and it's very expensive. These guys often monitor police scanners.
And he's super nice, right? He's like, hey, looks bad. I can take this to a great shop nearby. Let's get you off the road.
And you're vulnerable, you're stressed, you just want the problem to go away. But the guide warns you explicitly. Do not be intimidated into using just any tow truck driver.
So you can actually say no.
You absolutely should say no, at least at first. What you should do is call your insurance company. Most of them have 24-hour hotlines.
Ah, so you let them handle it.
Yes. They'll tell you who their approved towing services are. If you just go with a rando guy, they might tow it to a storage yard that charges, exorbitant daily fees, hundreds of dollars a day.
And your insurance won't pay for that.
They might refuse, calling the fees unreasonable.
Yeah.
Then the yard can basically hold your car hostage until you pay up. It happens all the time.
Wow. So you tell the guy who showed up to just wait?
You tell him to wait. If he's legitimate, he'll wait. And no matter who takes it, get the driver's details and photos of the trucking company logo. Know exactly where your car is going before it leaves your sight.
That brings us perfectly to phase 4, the insurance maze. You survive the crash, you dodge the towing scam, now you have to deal with the paperwork.
And the guide mentions a specific timeline here. You need to file that claim ideally within 24 hours. The sooner the better.
Why the rush?
Memories fade. Evidence gets lost. Rain can wash away those skid marks. But also, from a practical standpoint, insurance companies appreciate promptness.
Okay, and when you submit the claim, remember all those photos and that little sketch?
Your CSI file.
Exactly.
Don't just email a folder of 50 random JPEGs to the adjuster. Organize them. Here are the scene photos. Here's the damage to my car. Here is the police report number. Make it easy for the adjuster to say yes.
Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The thing everyone worries about more than the actual dent. The weight hike.
If I file this, is my premium going to skyrocket?
Exactly. I know people who have paid for repairs out of pocket just to avoid telling their insurance company.
It's a valid fear. The source breaks this down into at fault versus not at fault. If you are at fault, then yes, your rates are probably going to go up. You're now a higher risk.
But what if it wasn't my fault? What if I was stopped at a red light and got rear-ended? Surely I don't get punished for that.
You would hope not. But here is the harsh reality check from the source. Even not-at-fault accidents can raise your rates in some places.
That seems incredibly unfair.
It's all about risk profiling. The algorithm just sees that you drive in areas where accidents happen. Now, the increase is usually much smaller than for an at-fault accident. And some regions actually prohibit insurers from doing this.
Good to know. The guide also makes this interesting distinction between, like, hitting a deer versus hitting a fence.
Right, that's the difference between comprehensive and collision claims.
And I always get these two confused.
Think of comprehensive as bad luck, an act of God. You hit a deer, a tree branch falls on your car, hail damage. These aren't really seen as your fault, so they usually have smaller rate increases, or sometimes none at all.
And collision.
Collision implies you hit something. A fence, a wall, another car. That implies a driving error. And those are the claims that tend to hit your wallet the hardest.
And these hikes aren't just temporary.
No. The source mentions that surcharges can stick to your policy for 3 to 5 years. It's a long-term financial penalty.
Is there any good news here? Please tell me there's a silver lining.
There is one. It's a feature called accident forgiveness.
I've heard of this in commercials. I always figured it was just marketing fluff.
It's a real thing. If you have it on your policy, and usually a clean driving record, your insurer might just forgive your first at-fault accident.
So it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Essentially. Your rates don't go up for that first one. It's definitely worth checking if you have that on your policy before you need it.
Okay, let's go to the worst-case scenario. The absolute nightmare. You do everything right, but you find out the other driver has no insurance.
The uninsured nightmare.
How common is that?
Depending on where you live, It can be shockingly common. In some places, it's like 1 in 5 drivers.
So if they hit me and they have no money and no insurance, who pays to fix my car?
This is where that police report becomes your absolute lifeline. It proves what happened and documents their lack of insurance. But financially, you need to look at your own policy.
For what?
For something called uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, or UAM.
That's that little line on the insurance bill that I usually just skip right over.
That's the one. Think of it as insurance against other people's irresponsibility. If you have it, your own insurance company steps in and pays for what the other driver can't.
And if I don't have it?
If you don't have it, you might have to look at small claims court or legal action, which means trying to get money from someone who probably doesn't have any.
Getting blood from a stone, basically.
Exactly. It's a massive headache. Checking for that coverage is one of the biggest proactive takeaways from this whole deep dive.
Okay, finally, let's talk repairs. The car is in the shop. The guide mentioned something about having a choice, right?
Yes. In most places, you have the right to choose your own repair shop. Now, your insurer will strongly suggest their approved network, and that can streamline the billing.
But I don't have to use them.
No. If you have a trusted mechanic you've used for 20 years, you can usually insist on using them. It might just be a bit more paperwork.
And once the repair is done, the source has a specific technical check we need to ask for?
The alignment check. This is vital.
Why? If the car looks shiny and new, aren't we good?
Bodywork makes the car look right, and alignment makes the car drive right. And impact can throw your suspension's geometry off by just millimeters. If they don't fix that, the car won't handle safely, and you'll just chew through your tires.
Good tip. And what if the repairs just cost more than the car is even worth?
Then it's a total loss.
Yeah.
The insurance company essentially buys the car from you for its market value right before the crash.
And if you still owe money on the car loan,
The check goes to the lender first, you get whatever's left over.
which can be a rude awakening for a lot of people.
It can, but that's a whole other deep dive on gap insurance.
So let's bring this all back together. We started with that terrifying crunch, but now, instead of panic, we have a plan.
Exactly. We've moved from chaos to a checklist.
Phase 1. Safety and silence. Stop safely, check for injuries, and don't move them, and keep your mouth shut about fault. No apologies.
Phase 2. Document everything. The 4 corners photos, the skid marks, that sketch, and call their phone number to verify it.
Phase 3. Manage the authorities. Get that police report number, and don't let a random tow truck take your car hostage.
And finally, Phase 4. The insurance game. Report it fast, organize your evidence, and know your coverage before you need it.
It transforms a moment of total helplessness into a managed event. You're still going to be shaken up, you'll still be annoyed, but you won't be taken advantage of.
It really is a survival kit. It's just boring paperwork until you need it, and then it's the most important thing in the world.
So we've covered the what to do, but I want to leave you with a question that comes straight from that worst-case scenario we just discussed. The source highlighted the importance of uninsured motorist coverage.
It's the safety net for when other people break the rules.
Right. So here's the challenge for you today. You probably know exactly how much you pay for insurance every month, but do you actually know right now if you have uninsured motorist coverage on your policy? If a driver with no insurance T-bones you tomorrow morning, are you protected or are you on your own?
It is a 5-minute check. Open the app or pull out the paperwork.
And while you're at it, maybe through a
Please like, subscribe, and get notified.